Welcome to the Learning for Legacy show with me, your host, Afam Onyenakala. This is all about the concept of making generational wealth understandable, practical, and accessible. I'll be exploring a range of topics and sharing conversations, interviews, and more. Because what good is building wealth if we don't build the people? Welcome everyone to another episode of Learning for Legacy. Today, we're going to look at something a little bit different. I mentioned in a previous episode that the 4 key lenses that I will be looking at various aspects of addressing generational wealth will be through number 1, learning, number 2, laughter, 3, leadership, and finally 4, legacy. Now today, I'll be looking at understanding your learning style. And within this particular episode, I'll be covering things such as intelligence, such as also how to determine your learning style, how to determine your thinking style, and looking at the concept of multiple intelligences. So first of all, if we look at intelligence, what is intelligence? Now that can be interpreted and defined in various different ways. But from this perspective, we'll consider real intelligence as being able to react or to respond appropriately to problems, opportunities, and stimulations that you may encounter. So what we tend to find is that IQ, or intelligent quotient tests, they generally confuse logic, i.e. words and numerical things, with overall intelligence. Now, intelligence as we know it is not fixed. It can grow with use. And we have many different types of intelligences. And what we find is that historically, sometimes people's learning styles are not necessarily suited to their school styles. So if we look throughout history, we'll see examples of this, such as with Albert Einstein, with Winston Churchill, and even people like Leonardo da Vinci, who had a very basic formal education. So again, unfortunately and historically, many of these learning institutions, they would function as if every person was the same. Now, however, during the last few decades, people such as the late great Tony Buzan and people such as Professor Howard Gardner, they've researched and discovered that we have many different intelligences whereby you engage your brain with various different areas of your life. So greater success in learning will come when our combination of learning styles are discovered and we are encouraged towards a balanced development of our abilities. So later on, I'll deal with multiple intelligences in depth. But for now, these include areas such as numerical intelligence, linguistic and verbal intelligence, musical intelligence, kinesthetic or i.e. physical intelligence, also spatial and visual intelligence. We'll also look at the interpersonal and intrapersonal side of intelligence. And we'll also address creative intelligence, sensory intelligence. And these are some of the currently established intelligences, but more are being suggested all the time. So if we next look at what is your learning style, you can consider that to be a combination of 3 things. Firstly, how you take in information. Secondly, how your brain organizes and processes that information. And third, the physical conditions necessary to help you learn well. So, how do we take in information? For everybody, it's slightly different, but generally speaking, it tends to be classified in 3 different ways. Visually, so that could be either what you read, or you see, i.e. in words or pictures. The next one is auditory, what you hear. And the third one is kinesthetic. And this is down to physically doing things, handling things. This is all about participation. So kinesthetic activity can be something like writing, drawing, etc. And so what's actually happened is that historically, many school classrooms have often failed to meet the needs of these different areas. Now, how would you determine what a person's learning style is? For example, one of the things you could do is you could just simply ask them. So if we were to ask a person for directions from A to B, now a visual learner will most likely draw a map. An auditory learner will most likely ask for information. And a kinesthetic learner would give directions using a lot of expression and a lot of movement. So if we then look at how the brain organizes and processes information, we could go into a lot of detail on that, but I'll keep it fairly straightforward for now. So your brain, you can look at your brain in two segments. You've got the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. And in its most simplistic form, you can consider the left side of your brain to be the part of the brain that deals with logic, that deals with words and numbers, and deals with sequence. So that side of the brain takes in information if it's presented linearly in that respect. Now, the right side of the brain tends to deal with things such as rhythm, music, imagination, and pictures. So the right side of the brain tends to take in big picture information, for want of an expression. So a lot of the times we can look at it and say, right, as an individual, are you left-sided or right-sided brain in terms of dominance? Now, if we look at the third section, so again, I said your learning style is a combination of three things: how you take in information, how your brain organizes and processes information, and finally the third section is to do with the conditions that affect how you learn. So these conditions can often be the environment you're in. So is the temperature right? Is there noise? Do you work best with noise? Do you work best without noise? Is the seating good enough? Is the room setting appropriate? The next condition is to do with learning support. Are you the sort of person that works best in groups? What type of people do you work best with? Do you tend to work best with a partner? Or are you the sort of person that works best alone? And the other condition that can affect how you learn are your emotional needs. Now, this thing affects what's known as the limbic portion of the brain, and that's linked to the brain's memory system. So we've addressed a few things so far. We've looked at, just very briefly, we touched on intelligence, learning style, and now what I'd like to do is analyze our thinking styles, because we also all have particular thinking styles. Now, these will differ from person to person, but in that respect, no one thinking style is superior to another. But the significant thing here is that when you can understand both your learning style and your thinking style, your overall learning ability improves. Now, in 1982, Professor Anthony Gregork in the University of Connecticut, he carried out research on thinking styles and came up with 4 particular groups. Now, these groups are concrete sequential, concrete random, abstract random, and abstract sequential. So when you analyze what kind of thinker you are, the concrete sequential tends to think in an ordered, sequential, linear way. So, in reality, with physical senses, what they tend to do is they notice and recall details easily. So facts, formulas, rules, etc., things like that. So for that type of person, effective learning will look at things like using specific steps, working in a quiet environment, and developing your organizational strengths. Now, a concrete random thinker is somebody that is creative and very experimental in essence. So that person is willing to take on trial and error approaches. They're willing to find alternatives to doing things. And what a person like that will tend to do is to aim to solve problems. That they would use their ability to see things from different viewpoints and, giving themselves deadlines. These are some of the ways that a person that is a concrete random thinker will tend to operate best. Now, someone who is an abstract random thinker tends to be more influenced by feelings and emotions and reflection. So that particular person will absorb ideas and information and sort of organize them through reflection, and they tend to thrive well in people-focused settings. So what a person like that will tend to do is analyze the big picture. They will use visual clues to aid their memory and also recognize how their emotions influence their concentration. Now, the fourth one is the abstract sequential. Now, somebody who's an abstract sequential thinker, they love theory and abstract thought, but in a more logical, rational way. So they tend to think in concepts and analyze information. They find it very easy to focus on what's important. So looking at things like key points, important details, and they love to read. So one of the things that a person like that will do is to try and feed their intellect. That tends to stimulate, their learning and thinking. Feeding their intellect, doing things like logic exercises, and aiming towards sort of highly structured situations in that respect. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the whole area, as I mentioned earlier, of multiple intelligences. And there are quite a few of these, and we'll just go through just a few of them today. And the first one is somebody who's numerical in intelligence. So they're very mathematical and logical. Now, this type of person, their intelligence is focused in the area of having the ability to reason and calculate. So they've got the ability to handle combinations of numbers, logical thinking, things like that. So a clue that you can use to actually determine whether a person you're dealing with has a bent in a numerical intelligence fashion are clues such as, do they like problem and puzzle solving? Are they a neat worker? Do they like patterns? Do they like logical structures? Do they like counting? And, a generalization of this could be people who are lawyers, scientists, accountants, detectives, that type of thing. So a person like that, to improve their learning, they will use things like step-by-step diagrams and flowcharts, and also encourage problem-solving ideas and sort of analyzing and interpreting data and developing organizational skills. Now, if we look at the linguistic or verbal intelligence, someone whose bent is in that direction, they tend to have the ability to speak or to write. And they've got knowledge of different relationships between words. And clues to somebody who has that type of intelligence bent is that they like things like language, conversations, writing, reading, listening, and they also understand orders and patterns. So examples of people like that in different professions, you'll find there will be people such as speakers, journalists, writers, playwrights, even translators. Now, somebody like that, a way that they can improve their learning is to use debates and discussion to also mix writing and reading and speaking with other subject areas and puzzles. You see, and it's interesting here because one of the things historically that has happened is that unfortunately, many intelligence tests and school structures in the past would tend to focus on numerical and linguistic abilities, which are only a part of our learning potential. And this was often done to the exclusion of the other intelligences, which would then set up scenarios whereby different groups of people with different intelligence bents would often be marginalized. So if we now look at another area of intelligence, that would be musical intelligence. Now, this is the ability to sing, to compose music, play instruments. Clues to having this type of intelligence are somebody who's very rhythmic, very sensitive to sounds. They collect music, they easily remember lyrics. And if you look at people in these type of professions, you'll see people who are composers, performers, music lovers, instrument makers, and the like. So somebody who has, an intelligence of a musical bent, a way that they can improve their learning would be to study with background music, to play instruments, to write music, to also rap or recite words to music, linking images to music. This really stimulates their learning ability and helps to improve how they learn. So somebody who is more kinesthetic or has a kinesthetic intelligence, and kinesthetic is a word that's just more related to physical motion. So this can be somebody who's got particular athletic ability and physical coordination. So clues to someone like this would be a person who likes sports, they like games, they learn well by doing, they've got good reflexes, good mechanical ability. And you'll find that evident in people who are like athletes, actors, surgeons, dancers, and also craftspeople as well. Craftspeople are very kinesthetic. They express themselves very well in doing activity. So a way for a person like that to improve their learning is to use movement to act out learning. So, take many breaks, use physical models and tools, use interactive group activities, such as games, just use things that involve more games, as it were. Now, if we look at fifth type of intelligence, that would be spatial and visual intelligence. Now, this is really to do with the ability to understand the relationship of objects and shapes in three-dimensional space. So clues to people who are good at this are, you can see things such as people who are good with drawing and color. They're good with maps and diagrams. They have a good sense of direction. These are people with a very high level of spatial and visual intelligence. And you can see this evident in people who are painters or photographers, even things like a Formula One racing driver, airline pilots, sculptors, people who do these type of work or professions have to intend to be very visually aware of their surroundings and what's going on. What you will find with somebody like that is that they have a great sense of direction generally. And what you'll find is that in order for them to improve how they learn, what they tend to do is they will watch videos, they will draw diagrams, they will use things like symbols and mind maps, and they will create visual images of what they are trying to learn. And for them, that type of learning is far more effective than trying to document things in a linear fashion on a sheet of paper. They're just not built to learn in that fashion. Now, the next area of intelligence we're going to look at is slightly more relational, and it's to do with interpersonal intelligence. And that's a lot to do with the ability to understand and relate to others. So a clue to a person who has very good interpersonal intelligence is that they can be an excellent team worker. They could be a good mediator. They can negotiate and relate to people well. They can read people well. Often you hear, oh, this person is very good at reading people. That's a clue that they've got a high or higher level of interpersonal intelligence. They tend to handle social settings very well. So, when you look at people who have this level of intelligence, examples of them, you can look throughout society, and people who fit that type of role, as it were, would be teachers, coaches, salespeople, and counselors even. So what you'll find for people with a great level of interpersonal intelligence is that the way that they can improve learning is to teach what they're learning to somebody else, to work in teams, to also link social and communication skills with what they're learning. The next relational intelligence is intrapersonal intelligence. Now, that is the ability to understand and be at peace with yourself. And interestingly enough, some people would link this to spiritual intelligence, as it were. And a clue to seeing that in a person is they will have a good sense of self and purpose. They're deep thinkers. They have goals. They can enjoy their own company as much as that of the company of others. And you'll find people like that can be counselors, religious leaders, novelists, just to name a few. So what we'll also find is that people like that, ways that they can improve their learning are taking time to reflect on a subject, doing independent study, being free to be different from others, and controlling their own learning. Now, I've got two more levels of intelligence that I'm going to go through. And these two additional intelligences, they tend to overlap the other areas. And one of them is creative intelligence. And this is the ability to think in new ways. So it's all to do with originality. So how do they do that? Now, they would see things from different angles. They will have a different frequency that they generate new ideas, and they have a unique ability to create new ideas. And clues for people with a bent in creative intelligence are that they are very liberated in creative tasks. If you give them something very regimented to do, they feel quite constricted, So with creative tasks, they're quite determined. They tend to persevere through with it. And finally, sensory intelligence. Now, this is more to do with the ability to use your 5 physical senses to great effect. So it's really heightening these area of your senses to achieve greater things. And again, this particular type of intelligence tends to overlap into the other areas. Now, this is, I've just touched on 9 areas of intelligence, but there's so many more areas that are being looked into and researched over time. So the list I've given you so far is by no means restrictive, but it's a bit of a taster into what's out there, and really a case of you just having a look and seeing where do you fit within this equation. Because again, learning for legacy, we're talking about the whole area and theme of generational wealth, and that will come through personal development and application. But the best way to do that first is really through your unique learning and thinking style. And then, learning just then becomes fun. Learning is no longer like work. You see this evident, in everyday scenarios. You look at somebody who's a gifted footballer and they're making millions of dollars or pounds a year. I remember listening to an interview by Bobby Robson, the former England football manager, and he once said that Monday was his favorite day of the week. And they said, why is Monday your favorite day of the week? He said it's because he can't wait to get onto the field and train with the players or coach the players. Now for him, he had a very successful career as a football manager. And the reason for that was that for him, work didn't seem like work. It was a fun thing for him to do. It was enjoyable. There was energy there, because I believe he found his work uniquely connected to what he was passionate about, the way he was able to learn, his ability to learn, and his ability to then translate that to the people within his circle. So I hope you're able to take something away from this. We will, over time, go into a few of these areas in more depth. And for now, enjoy, and we will speak again soon. Thanks for listening to Learning for Legacy. To join our community or find out about what else we get up to, you can follow us on Twitter at Legacy Learning or on our website at www.legacylearning.co.uk. To access additional content or exclusives from this particular episode, please find the information within the show notes.